Okay. So, time for 2021 detox, and we can think about this in many levels. We can think about it as a chemical detox, emotional detox, physical detox. But for the purposes of today, we're going to talk about environmental toxins in this 1.5 hours that we've got together. So, as always, just want to highlight this disclaimer to please remember that the content of this presentation are for information purposes only, and they're not intended to substitute for professional or medical advice or diagnosis or treatment. If you suspect that you have any of the issues that we're discussing today, or you want to explore them further, then please seek medical advice and do not disregard that medical advice that's been given to you, and always check for allergies and seek help before you take any herbs, supplements, or medications to deal with current or potential health problems. So today's goals, we really want to outline the impact of environmental toxins on our health and highlight the role that biotransformation and elimination has in dealing with that environmental exposure, and what are the practical advice that you can take today and every day moving forward in order to lower that toxic body burden using diet, lifestyle, and other strategies. So this is really an important topic. Why? Because again, this year has really shown us in a very clear way that while genetics play a major role in your health, they do not determine your destiny. So your genetics really load the gun, but your lifestyle and your environment is what pulls the trigger. And I was just speaking to Farah before we got started, and I saw a post the other day on the Broken Brain series podcast, where it was basically rehashed this and highlighted that chronic disease, the high level of chronic disease that we have across the world right now, is what really loaded the gun, and COVID just pulled the trigger. And we can see that with all the data that's coming out, that people are have worse prognosis with the SARS-CoV-2 virus when infected if they have underlying conditions that promote inflammation and chronic conditions. So we know that toxic exposure and the environment plays a very important role. And if we recall from our previous talks, we talked about this trifecta where a genetic predisposition, leaky gut, plus environmental exposure is really the gateway to the development of autoimmune conditions and chronic conditions overall. So this is really, really important that we look at our environment and assess what are we exposing ourselves on a daily basis to that could be pushing us more towards illness rather than wellness. So 90% of our current health is controlled by the environment in which we bathe our genes in. So it's not really about just genetics. This is the field of epigenetics, right? So it's not the gene doesn't equal your destiny, but the environment in which you bathe your gene and determines whether it turns on or off. And this is impacted by the food we eat, our exercise regimen, our resilience in the face of stress, our exposure to environmental toxins. And the latter part is the one we want to focus on. And this is what leads to our introduction to what we call the exposome. And the exposome is essentially all the combined exposures that come from all sources, such as drugs, radiation, food, stress, pollution, air pollution, things such as agricultural toxins, toxins in personal care products, industrial toxins like heavy metals. Um, all of these that basically reach the body's internal chemical environment inside us and from conception throughout our life and have and cause an effect, a physiological effect internally. So over extended period of time, small daily doses of these multiple contaminants have a cumulative detrimental effects on our physiological pathways, which eventually impair health and cause disease. So how do we process environmental exposure? How do we do that? So within the functional medicine matrix model, one of the major systems that we look at, all of them are interconnected, of course, but one of the major ones we are focusing on today is the biotransformation and elimination node of the matrix. And this is where these are all the multiple organs in the body that are involved in the processing of toxins and excretion and eliminations of toxins. And of course, biotransformation and elimination is very much driven, very much affected and affects all the other nodes in the matrix. So it affects the immune system, it affects energy, it's affected by energy. It's a very energy heavy process. It's affected by, affects your hormones, and it's affected by your hormones. Structural integrity. So if you have breakdown in your barriers, such as a leaky gut or oral cavity, that lends itself to a greater exposure to toxins that get straight into the bloodstream, and of course, assimilation and digestion, which is access through the gut. So this is what we're going to focus on today: is this node of biotransformation and elimination. And our guiding principles from a functional medicine perspective, when we think about that, are the following: is that exposure to environmental toxins is really widespread and it's increasing and lifelong. So it's not doom and gloom. I don't want you to think, this is really scary. It's not. It's just we have to accept that we are exposed to environmental toxins on a regular basis, and that environmental exposure, toxin exposure, is increasing, and it's present for a long time. And Farah is going to highlight this when she talks about the half life in which some of these chemicals stay in our body. And so acknowledging that is really important, because then we know we can do something about it, because our body is incredibly resilient and equipped with the right tools to process these toxins. Now, the total body burden of these toxins can act synergistically to cause a physiological dysfunction. So the higher the burden of toxin in your body, the more likely it's going to cause an imbalance and result in symptoms of dysfunction, such as fatigue or acne or rash or so on. This dysfunction can then lead to chronic illness in susceptible individuals. So, chronic illness, by that I mean things like hormone imbalances like PCOS, or autoimmune conditions, or cancer, and so on. So, but the key point here I want to make is susceptible individual. And what do we mean by susceptibility when it comes to detoxification? It's basically defined by your ability, the individual's ability, to biotransform, detoxify, and eliminate internal and external toxins effectively. So it's not just about exposure, it's exposure plus susceptibility is what drives the development of chronic illness. And the final principle is that actually lifestyle, diet, and nutraceuticals can enhance detoxification and help prevent disease and restore health. So even though it sounds a little bit doom and gloom at the start, but actually there's a lot you can do, simple changes that you can make that can have tremendous impact on the trajectory of your health, in particular when it comes to biotransformation and elimination. So, the key message I want to highlight here is that we live an inflammatory life because we live in an inflammatory world. That's really the bottom line. Okay, we have plastics at home, phthalates that off gas in the air from furniture to carpets, um, to blinds, that basically you're breathing on a daily basis. Same thing is the formaldehyde in that is it's mixed in most of the ceilings. It's estimated that in the US, the average person is exposed to 247 pounds of chemicals per day. That is an extortionate amount of chemicals that the body has to deal with. And that's not without forgetting that the body also has to clear internal toxins that it produces on a regular basis. The average woman is actually exposed to 168 chemicals a day in most developed countries, from the clothes she wears to the makeup she puts on, the shampoos, the hair dyes, and of course the environment that she lives in. And then nail polish, for example, just to give you an idea, when it comes to women, nail polish, if you're using non-organic or so on nail polish, the usual nail polish that you find, it's actually absorbed within your system within 3 to 5 minutes. So imagine all of these toxins going into your system and causing inflammation. So really the facts are in, since World War II, there's over 85,000 synthetic chemicals that have been registered in the US, and then over 140,000 chemicals registered in European market. That's and I know that this data is outdated because this was from last year's 2 years ago. This data was from 2 years ago. So in general, when chemicals are produced to be used in common household products, they generally, what happens is that chemicals are produced, the chemicals are identified, they see that they have a benefit in optimizing certain products, and then they're released into the market, and then only later do we find out, oh, okay, actually it does have a significant impact on healthcare. So there's a lag time between us finding out the impact, because none of these chemicals are actually studied in trials as you would, for example, with pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So each year, there's an estimated 2,000 new chemicals introduced for use in everyday items. So your body has to continuously learn and adapt in order in how it actually eliminates and clears this out of your body, out of your system. And roughly 3,000 synthetic chemicals are manufactured in high production volume. More than 1 million pounds of each chemical are produced or imported into the US every year. I mean, the US, it has one of the highest numbers. China is actually really high as well. India is really high as well. But the facts are really in that we are living in a chemical age. There's a high amount of exposure that we are that is present at the moment, that our body needs to deal with. And if you think about it, our biotransformation elimination capacity, our biology, our biochemistry, and how we do that hasn't changed. It's been the same as it was thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's sophisticated enough to cope with all of that, but there's, of course, a limit. So it's important to remember that this is not, that the exposure actually starts in the womb, so much earlier than one might think, like, oh, it's something I have to worry about later. No, it actually starts much earlier. And you remember that the umbilical cord is the lifeline between mother and baby, and it bears nutrients that sustain life, and it's important for growth, but it's also a steady stream of industrial chemicals. Kind of the placenta acts as a dumping ground for the body when it has too much chemicals floating around and it can't get rid of it. It basically stores it in fat or in bone, or it can actually store it in the placenta in this case. So it's really important to think about reducing that toxic burden before pregnancy, or if as often the case, people get pregnant and they're not aware, is to work with a functional medicine practitioner to help reduce that toxic burden and prevent that transmission to the child. Chemical exposures in the womb or during infancy, they really can be very harmful later in life because they actually impact cognitive development. They can increase risk of autoimmune conditions. And this vulnerability is a result of the actual organ systems in the baby not being mature still, and the detox pathways are not mature still. So this big study that was done by the Environmental Working Group was very fascinating, and it studied basically cord blood toxin levels, and it found that the average baby is born with, on average, babies are born with over 278 chemicals. That's what they're exposed to. And that's a huge number. And actually, 180 of those chemicals are known to cause cancer in humans and animals. 217 of those chemicals are toxic to the brain and the nervous system, and 208 of those numbers can cause birth defects, which was studied in animals only. But this is a very important message that we need to think about the exposures that we've had, even when we're considering our own history. Think about the exposure our mother had when we were in the womb, in order to understand what is our current body burden of toxin and how can we clear it and what we need to do about it. So the effect of environmental toxins on our body is quite huge. Okay, so these toxins can range from molds to pesticides to plastics, to heavy metals, and Farah is going to go into these in more detail. But what I wanted to highlight here is the effect it has on the body. So these toxins, they when they enter our body, they can do several things. They can do one or multiple of these things that are listed here, depending on what toxin we're talking about. So, for example, they poison enzymes. Okay, and enzymes are essential for the functioning of every aspect of our body. So it leaves some of our enzymes ineffective, which and then that leads to functional decline in certain areas of our body. It displaces structural minerals. Okay, so heavy metals displace calcium, and as a result, we have weaker bones. It also damages organs like the brain. So mercury actually can cross the blood-brain barrier and cause neuroinflammation. Chlorine can also result in thyroid damage. It also damages the DNA, so it can lead to aging and cellular degeneration. And things like pesticides, phthalates, the wrong type of estrogen metabolism that we talked about in our last talk, and then benzene, all lead to DNA damage. And DNA damage leads to inflammation, and that inflammation also increases the risk of autoimmune conditions, including cancer. It can actually modify gene expression. It can directly affect the function of the cell receptor sites. So basically, it competes with the receptor at the cells with the normal with normal molecules. So endogenous molecule. So basically, it interrupts the signaling between cell to cell, and so we have basically a communication breakdown. And this is where we see, for example, issues with mental health and anxiety are quite where toxins play a very big role. It also interferes with hormones. So endocrine disruptors are a really big thing that's been in the news for and in the scientific arena for many years now, because our body is so sensitive to small changes in hormone levels. So when these endocrine disruptors, which are basically chemicals like BPA and phthalates that have a similar molecular structure to those hormones in a sense that they can attach where hormones attach and basically disrupt the function of the hormone, and so result uh, in in disease. And I'm going to talk about this in more detail. And then it also impairs our ability to detoxify, because the higher the burden, the body burden of toxin, the more our detox pathways are overwhelmed, and then we're unable to cope. And then this starts to spill into the circulation and cause inflammation and drive illness. So let's talk about endocrine chemicals, disruptors, and their impact on the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and in particular, the thyroid. Okay, so this is an example from a study that was done to show the impact of, as you can see, pesticides, BPAs, phthalates, and so on, and its impact on target action in the endocrine system. And so here specifically, they were looking at the thyroid, and you can see that all of these chemicals can significantly impact thyroid hormone transportation, thyroid hormone metabolism, thyroid hormone production, and impact, for example, not just the thyroid itself, but impact the pituitary and the hypothalamus, who regulate the release of hormones from the thyroid, but they can also impact the conversion of the thyroid in the liver. So they have a significant detrimental impact on thyroid health. So if you see on the diagram on the right-hand side, all these where you can see A, B, C, it just shows you the areas in which that or these endocrine disruptors can basically come in and interrupt the natural process of thyroid hormone stimulation, production, conversion, and action. Phthalates, on the other hand, they also a big study that was done in their impact on brain development. So it actually inhibits neurogenesis. So the study was done. There are many studies, but I just kind of wanted to pick a few to showcase some of the long-term impact that these chemicals have. In this study, they examined the association between pregnancy between pregnancy, maternal biomarkers. So they looked at the level of phthalates and BPA in pregnant women's urine, and then assessed the IQ, followed their children, their offspring, after 6 years, and assessed the nonverbal intelligence quotient (IQ) in children at 6 years of age. And basically, the message is simple: higher urinary concentrations of phthalates and BPA during early pregnancy were associated with significantly lower child nonverbal IQ scores. So there was a significant impact on the brain development and cognitive function. And so these results suggest that this particular early pregnancy is the sensitive window, but nonetheless, we want to reduce that impact as much as possible. And we support, even if we know that the numbers are high, let's say in a pregnant woman, we assess it. Of course, we're going to support her through nutrition because there's not much we can do to detox during pregnancy because that would be dangerous. But what we can do is we're aware what the offspring is going to experience, and then we can work on supporting the child's detox pathways as they develop in the younger years to pull out all of these toxins safely and help the healthy development of that child. So, what are the typical signs and symptoms of a high toxic load or impaired detoxification? So typically, if I see patients in my clinic that feel vaguely unwell or have persistent fatigue that's unexplained, or they have sudden onset of autoimmune disease or chronic neurological disorders, or for example, if someone tells me they're sensitive to all sorts of uh, fumes, solvents, chemicals, detergents, smoke, if they have high sensitivity that they can't cope. Some people actually have I have some patients who have very severe reaction that they feel nauseous, some may vomit. If you have such a strong reaction, you know that you have crossed that threshold where their toxic load is incredibly high, and your ability to clear it from the system is compromised. So if they have a personal history, personal or family history of cancer, if they have a long history of constipation, unexplained infertility in both men and women is a very big sign of impaired detoxification or high toxic load. In men, actually, in particular, a lot of the times the reason for infertility is due to high oxidative damage. So there's a lot of high toxic load in the system, which causes DNA fragmentation in the sperm, and that results in miscarriage because uh, the woman's reproductive organs and the egg would sense that DNA fragmentation, and would lead to a miscarriage because that would lead to an unhealthy offspring. So the body is very, very clever, and it has really a remarkable ability to adapt and switch. So your symptoms may change, for example, from headaches to rash to GI symptoms, to muscles, aches, pains. But and sometimes it could be entirely different. Additionally, certain foods, chemicals, and even fragrances can seem fine at time, but then they become suddenly they're not, because the body is constantly trying to process all of these chemicals, and sometimes it processes them by eliminating them. Sometimes it cannot eliminate them, so it stores them in fat, or it can store them in the bones, or dump them in the placenta in the case of a pregnancy. And so we have to be, that's where it's important when working with patients, is we look at their long-term history of exposure, and what are the symptoms that occurred during that lifespan that ultimately resulted in whatever condition they're suffering from now. So, what we really want to focus on is to redefine detox for you, because detox has been used so much, and a little bit been bastardized a little bit, the word, because when we think of detox, we think about juicing, or like juice fasts, or severe intermittent fasting diets, or we think about dietary restriction, and so on. But actually, that's not what detox is. Detox is, when we think about detox, it's really what helps us determine the three key ways that determine whether you will enjoy health and vitality today and tomorrow and for a long life. One is the extent of your exposure to toxins. Two, your ability to neutralize these toxins and get rid of them. And third, your commitment to building your detox capacity. Okay, so that's what detoxification or doing a detox is about. It's not about just doing a 3 4 day a detox diet. No, it's about understanding what is the exposure you have. Am I able to clear it and neutralize it effectively? And what is my commitment to make sure that I'm constantly supporting my detox capacity so that I can enjoy life without worrying about taxing my body and driving illness. So, so this is where the concept of body burden comes in. So the human body, as we talked about, is confronted every day with lots of toxic exposures, and from the air we breathe, the food we eat, things that get absorbed on our skin, and we deal with this continuously. Think of it as a glass of water that you're constantly filling. Okay, if you continue to pour into it, eventually it's going to overflow, right? So if the exposure is limited, right, so the body can cope with it, it can clear it, then you're fine because the immune system won't be triggered and you won't have health issues. But when this glass overflows, this spillage will end up going into the bloodstream, and this is going to trigger the immune system because what it means is your detox capacity is overwhelmed. It can no longer cope with all the insults that are coming in. So what's coming in and what's produced internally is more that at the rate at which it can clear it. And this is what we call the total toxic body burden. When this happens, the external toxins that you've ingested, they become then internal toxins. And just like if you recall from our previous talks, when we talked about the bacterial toxin that's produced in the gut, that's called LPS, that leaks into the bloodstream when there's leaky gut. The same thing happens is these, just like LPS, these toxins, they become internal toxins, they leak into the bloodstream, they can cross the blood-brain barrier, they can cause neuroinflammation, they can trigger autoimmunity, and so on. And so and then it becomes very hard to remove because now multiple systems are involved in this reaction. So, but your body is very clever, as I mentioned, because even when it can't, for example, it can't deal with a particular toxin, because it's overwhelmed or it cannot process it, the way it deals with it is it basically dumps it in fat, and this is where people get sometimes this stubborn fat around the midsection they can't get rid of, or it can dump it in the bone, which we can see that is the case with heavy metals. So these are the things that from this, just to show you like where you can get where the body burden builds up, like what are the sources from inhalation, from skin absorption, digestion, self-administered, so drugs, alcohol, pharmaceuticals. One I want to highlight is the use of paracetamol. Overuse of paracetamol is actually quite detrimental to our detox pathways because it depletes glutathione, which is the major detoxifier in our body. So paracetamol should really be used sparingly when needed, and definitely never ever after drinking alcohol, during alcohol, or like if you're drinking alcohol or the day after to the hangover, because that effect is even multiplied. So essentially, we are what we eat, what we drink, what we breathe, what we touch, and most importantly, can't eliminate. Okay, because it's all great if we can get all of these things in, but if we can't get them out, we have a big problem. And this is where biotransformation emission comes. So this is what we talked about. This total toxic load, this threshold, is basically your total toxic exposure. Okay, that comes from water, air, food, soil, dust, personal products, so on, right? Minus your ability to biotransform and excrete. Okay. So this is where the susceptibility piece comes in, as I mentioned earlier. So if you have a poor ability to biotransform toxins, then you're going to reach that total toxic load quicker. Or if your total toxic exposure is extremely high because you work in a chemical plant, then your total toxic load is going to be reached quite fast. So let's talk about what is biotransformation. Biotransformation is a two-step process, phase one and phase two, chemical process that occurs throughout the body, but primarily the major action occurs in the liver. So the liver is basically, think of it as the customs in the airport. Everything has to pass through the liver. And if what it takes is takes all these xenobiotics, phytochemicals, endogenous compounds, everything, and it converts them into a less toxic state, and so that they can be readily excreted through the urine or the gut, or inhaled or sweated out. And this reaction, as you can see from the diagram, it requires a high volume and variety of nutrients. So, so this is where the issue of detox becomes, in the common terms, becomes an issue, because you cannot detox if you're nutritionally deficient or you're undernourished. Okay, or reducing your nutrient intake to detox is a complete uh, um, it's really a complete disaster, because for the body to be able to detoxify effectively, it needs you to be nourished, and you have to have a high volume and variety of nutrients, and you have to have a high level of ATP energy. It's very energy dependent, and that goes back to the health of your mitochondria. So um, this is why it's really important that when we think about detox, we actually think about nutrition, because nutrition can be an extremely powerful way to detoxify, full stop. So so liver health is a really key thing that we look at and explore when it comes to assessment of our patients' overall well-being. But there's also a significant amount of activity that exists in the gut, lungs, kidney, skin, and blood-brain barrier. And really, I don't have the time to go into the gut in a lot of details. We can refer back to our previous talks, but it really starts with the gut, because the gut plays a key role in the protection. It's a physical barrier from the outside world. It also is phase one and phase two reactions also do occur. So it does um, some biotransformation also in its own way, because the HCl in the stomach kills some of the toxins and bugs and so on. The intestines has digestive enzymes, which also form as a protection layer. And then, as I mentioned, the gut wall has also the phase one reactions, but also it's important for elimination, i.e., through stool, but also it's responsible in recycling of toxins that have been released by the liver. And we talked about this a lot in the estrogen talk last week. So so this is where the gut microbiome, the lung microbiome, the oral microbiome. So when we talk about the gut, it's everything from the mouth to the anus, really. So all of those, this microbiome is so important for biotransformation and detoxification. And that's why it explains why some people will have a different ability to metabolize and different sensitivities. So that's why we have major individual variation when it comes to detoxification. And some people are more sensitive to toxins because of the things I mentioned, like overwhelming toxic load, poor elimination, dysbiosis, imbalance in the gut flora, nutrient deficiencies. For example, people on birth control pills, they have significant nutrient deficiency, in particular B vitamins and magnesium, which are essential for the function of the liver and detoxification. High sugar, low protein diets, chronic inflammation, and then stress, and also we can also have polymorphism, so variations in your genes that are responsible for those enzyme reactions. So what can you do to decrease your body's total toxic load today? There's actually quite a lot you can do. So first, you want to explore your exposome history. So where it starts really with the womb, thinking about what your mother experienced, the environment she was around, what she ate, did she smoke, was she around somebody who smoked heavily, drinking, and so on. But also your home and work environment as your life progressed. Your diet and lifestyle, was it an inflammatory diet? Was it an anti-inflammatory diet? Were you active? Were you um, sedentary? Did you have history of constipation? Any history of major trauma? That has a significant impact, because it actually causes change in, it can drive a change in the genes, and that worsens your capacity to detoxify in the liver. and any history of reaction to drugs, allergies, chemicals, odors, and so on. And then physical findings, these are really important. So, do you suffer from severe constipation? Then you definitely have a detox issue. Do you have poor digestion? Then that's a sign. If you have acne, it means your body is unable, it's pushing things out. So your skin is really the window to your inside. Are you developing rashes? Are you getting inflammation? Are you having joint pain or muscle aches, fatigue, fluid retention, obesity, and autoimmune condition? All these are signs that you are reached that threshold of total toxic body burden. Another really good sign, a physical sign, is looking at your tongue. And if there's scalloping around your tongue, it kind of looks like it's taking the shape of your teeth from the inside. That's often, and this is from Chinese medicine, this is often a sign of enlarged tongue and stagnation of blood, and that means there's a high toxic load, and the liver is unable to clear things effectively. So I often look at my patients' tongues. There's a lot more signs to look at, but this is one very clear sign that we need to look at. Of course, also if you have um, uh, a taste bud atrophy, that could also be a sign that you'll be vitamin deficient, and that's also would have a significant impact on your detox capacity. And then you want to detoxify your environment. So we want to optimize the air quality, the water quality, eat organic foods, use toxic-free cleaning products, reduce exposure to EMFs. And Farah is going to talk about this in a lot more detail. And then you want to test. Really important to test. I cannot tell you how many of my patients have a high level of mold toxicity, of heavy metal toxicity. And it's not because some people say, well, I've been living really healthy the last 3 years. How come it's still there? Farah is also going to highlight the half-life in which some of these chemicals, it takes years for them to clear your system. And so it's important that if you have those systems and you work with a practitioner, that you test effectively. So you can test for heavy metals in the hair, in the blood, in the urine. You can look at mold toxicity, and also you could do a fat biopsy, you could do blood or urine, you could do stool analysis and check for leakiness in the gut lining. You can look for uh, you look at the actual detoxification capacity of your liver, look at oxidative stress markers, and of course nutritional deficiencies like the metabolomics from Genova or the organics, because these are really important. As I mentioned, without adequate nutrition you cannot detoxify, period. And then we look at genetic susceptibility as well. If you have mutations in your MTHFR gene or glucuronidation genes or sulfonation genes, all of these are genes that are that code for the key enzyme reactions in the liver that support detoxification. And then you want to optimize your detox pathways, okay? And that's basically your liver, your gut, your skin, and so on, your kidneys. So really, you want to hydrate well. You want to sweat through exercise and sauna. You want to remove sugars and refined grains and processed foods. You want to increase intake of vegetables, especially green cruciferous vegetables. You want to enhance antioxidant reserve. There was a beautiful study, I didn't include it here, but it showed the difference between, they had two groups of people, and they looked at basically people who ate whole food versus those that ate food wrapped in plastics. And it was just phenomenal, the impact that it had on their detox capacities. The shift was significant in a matter of weeks. So there's a lot you can do to really reduce your toxic load and support your detox capacity. Repair the gut lining, because again, as I mentioned, it's the entryway, it's the first pass, and then rebalance your gut, mind, and body spirit connection, because that's really important in driving the health of the vagus nerve and the mitochondria that need to power your detox pathways. And then this is a really basic starting point. You can really just do this at a foundational level, and it will do you a lot of benefit. Take probiotics, focus on increasing your fiber, use algae like chlorella, increase your intake of vegetables. Green tea is a fantastic detoxifier. Spices in cooking are phenomenal at activating all those enzyme pathways. Pomegranate juice has ellagic acid, which is a very powerful detoxifier. Red wine, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, dark chocolate, milk thistle. All of these are fantastic ways in which you can support your detox pathways. Vitamin D, again, really important, and fatty acids, and NAC, which is the precursor to glutathione. Milk thistle, just a word of caution, if you experience any anemia, then we have to be careful when using that. But again, as I mentioned, you want to work with a professional in order to help you. But a lot of these things you can already do and apply. So remember that our body burden of toxin matters. When we understand what the environmental toxins negatively impact our body and how to avoid it, then we truly stand a better chance of improving our collective health, uh, health span and longevity. Because it's not just about lifespan; it's really about lifespan plus health span. You wanna live healthier and more vital for longer, rather than get aging and getting sicker and sicker with time. So these are some great books that you can pick up and read, which have a lot of wonderful information that explain the impact of toxins and how do you cope and live in this sort of soup of chemical age we are in. And as I mentioned, it's not doom and gloom. There's so many things you can do, and simple things, simple changes. And Farah is going to guide you through this now, and I'm really excited that you are going to take this information and hopefully apply it in the first quarter of 2021, and you can see your life truly transform for you and your loved ones. Thank you so much for listening, and I will hand over to Farah.
Thank you so much, Amal. Super informative as always. So let me share my screen and get started. Amal, can you just enable screen sharing? Okay, so I'm pretty much going to continue from where Amal stopped. So I'll talk a little bit more about the different types of chemicals that we find in all sorts of, whether it's food products, body care products, detergents, and then small switches and changes that we can make in our lifestyle habits. So again, a disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with any of the brands that I mentioned, and none of the information is meant to diagnose. We're always happy to give personalized recommendations on a one-to-one basis. So toxins, they are where you can least expect them. Okay, so from toothpaste to tampons and pads, to again, detergents and your moisturizer, food, of course, mold that can be growing in the house, EMFs. Okay, so EMFs is also a big thing that we can talk a little bit about later. Clothes, so toxins can be everywhere. Okay, so it's what we can do to reduce our exposure. Okay, it's pretty impossible to avoid all toxins. Okay, but our aim is to take small steps to reduce the overall load that we can be exposed to on a day-to-day basis, while supporting our body in terms of trying to get rid of whatever it is that we're exposed to. Okay, so please don't feel overwhelmed. Again, it's taking it a step at a time. It's knowing that we cannot be, completely sort of, we can't avoid them. Okay, but we can definitely take action to minimize. So from makeup to nail polish to acrylic nails to our Tupperwares, again, furniture. Okay, so the mattress, sofa, baby, baby toys. This picture gives me a lot of anxiety when I see it, because I have quite a few of those, well, in my daughter's room. So that's, I think, a step for me in 2021 to try and get rid of as much of those as possible. So again, they are everywhere. Okay. So the average one of us uses about 10 to 15 personal care products on a daily basis. And there are dozens, so even, more than 100 different ingredients are contained within these products. And a vast majority of these are actually not regulated. So Emma did speak about half-life. So what do we mean by half-life? It's the ability of your body to get rid of these toxins by 50%. So arsenic takes a few days. Okay, well, just to get rid, just for levels to come down by 50%. Cadmium can take 16 years. DDT can take up to 10 years. Lead can take a few months, but in the bone, it can last for years and years. Mercury, again, for a few months. And then PCBs can last for decades. Okay, so up to 30 years in some individuals. Okay, so it's really recognizing that these sometimes no matter what you try, you can be exercising, all you want, eating the right foods, but if you unconsciously or without knowing have a high level of toxins in your blood, then this can really impact your ability to heal. Okay, so this is something that we can look at through testing and something that we can address. Okay, so whether it's heavy metal chelation therapy, and whether it's those step by step things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. So there is definitely treatment and modifications that we can do in order to minimize these levels that can happen in the body. So just I'm going to go over a few of the most common chemicals. So BPA, no doubt we have all heard of it, and we associate this with plastic bottles. Okay, so the plastic, especially, I mean, if you're based in the UAE, this is definitely something we want to take into consideration, because the fact that for 5-6 months of the year we have super super hot weather, and these bottles can be out in the sun for very long periods of time. These chemicals can definitely leach into the water, so this is something to take into consideration. Okay, so making the switch from plastic to glass. Sometimes it's not 100% doable. If you have a cooler, rather than buying, let's say, small bottles of plastic, let's say bottles of plastic water, or plastic bottles of water, sorry. Even if you have a cooler, you can just fill up glass bottles. Okay, so definitely we want to take into consideration BPA. It's not only plastic bottles, it can also be found in kids' toys, dental and healthcare equipment, and cans as well. Okay, so a lot of the canned foods that we find on the supermarket shelves also contain, the lining also contains BPA. Okay, so in general, BPA is found in the manufacturing of polycarbonate plastics, PVC. Okay, so for example, even the cling film that we use, and these. So in general, PCBs have been linked to hormonal disorders, infertility, early maturation, or puberty in girls. So this is again something we're struggling with nowadays. Girls experiencing puberty at 9 or 10 years of age, and also certain types of cancers. Okay, so I'll talk about more tips later on. So phthalates are used as plasticizers in the manufacturing of plastics and other products to help improve whether it's flexibility, elasticity, and resiliency. So we can find them in medical devices, we can find them in certain coatings of medications, food packaging, paints, kids' toys, cleaning materials, and cosmetics and lotions. Okay, so they are found in a wide variety of products that we use. And they are classified as endocrine disrupting compounds. So they affect our endocrinology, our hormones. Okay, so that in turn can impact reproduction, again, early puberty in girls. It can affect our immune system, our thyroid, and metabolic conditions as well. Parabens, a type of synthetic chemical commonly used as a preservative. We find parabens in medications, personal care products, cosmetics, and food products. So again, it's even the medications that we can be taking on a day-to-day basis can also have a bunch of other chemicals that are not necessarily good for us. So we can absorb parabens through the skin. Think of your skin as a giant mouth. Whatever you put on the skin is going to end up in the bloodstream. Okay, so we really tend to overlook this part. Okay, so whatever we put on our hands, on our face, on our body, the shampoo that we use is going to end up in our bodies. Okay, and then this in turn can affect whether it's hormones, whether it's the immune system, etc. Okay, so again, it can predispose us to things like cancer and other conditions as well. Triclosan, this is used as an antimicrobial in soaps. In the EU, this is restricted. Okay, well, at least the use in toothpaste, mouthwash, deodorants, cosmetics, and hand soaps is restricted in the UA, and sorry, in the EU. And then the US, it's banned in liquid soaps and soap bars as of 2016. And triclosan has been shown again to impact our hormones, particularly our thyroid hormones. It can be very irritating to the skin, to the eyes, and it's actually very toxic to um, aquatic organisms. Volatile organic compounds. So this is something we find in things like paints, cleaning supplies, craft supplies. So if you are, an artist, if you deal with paint, if your occupation involves dealing, with art supplies and paint, this is something to take into consideration. Okay, again, sometimes our occupation and what we do and what we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis for several hours, sometimes at end, can negatively affect our health. Okay, so it's important to take certain precautionary measures, while handling these equipment. So organic compounds can easily change from a liquid state to a vapor state, so we can inhale them. Okay, so these include things like formaldehyde, acetone. So again, all of those that I've just mentioned, whether we inhale them, whether we absorb them through the skin, whether we are consuming them orally through food, they are going to negatively impact our health. And it's the long-term exposure, again, that can also be very detrimental. Okay, so sometimes it's a short-term exposure, but also long-term exposure, which makes things more complicated, and our health really starting to get affected in a negative way. Pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, these are all, of course, we know that they are um, sprayed or thrown on our agriculture in order to prevent, pests, weeds, but then we are consuming those. Okay, and sometimes they can be really a pain to get rid of, even through washing. Okay, so they can really leach into the fruit, the vegetables. So uh, one way that we can, prevent or reduce our exposure, of course, is through eating organic foods. So in general, we can be exposed to pesticides and herbicides through our diet. Again, if we work with these pesticides, particularly if we're gardening, depending on occupation. So these have been linked with all sorts of problems, whether it's neurological problems, things like brain fog, fatigue, um, even poor focus sometimes, endocrine problems, respiratory problems, and immune conditions as well. Glyphosate has really been in the news over the past couple of years, and this is the most commonly used herbicide. And we find residues in everything. So even, things that we consider healthy, whether it's, things like oats, it's found in also so many things, legumes, okay, things like chickpeas and lentils. So tap water can contain glyphosate, sports fields can contain glyphosate, public parks and lawns, animal feeds, and then, a lot of food that we eat every day. So the American Cancer Society has added glyphosate to their list of known and probable human carcinogens, and the WHO characterized glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans, and it's still being used. Okay, so Roundup, glyphosate is still being used. And glyphosate has been shown to significantly impact our gut microbiome. Our gut bacteria, we know, has been linked to when we have, let's say, a healthy microbiome, we are protected from a lot of conditions like autoimmunity, even things like skin issues. We can even talk about cardiovascular disease and cancers. But when we have dysbiosis or an imbalance or an overgrowth, let's say, of bad or unhealthy bacteria, this can, lead to all sorts of different health problems. And glyphosate can cause dysbiosis. Okay, so from mood disorders to thyroid issues to gastrointestinal disorders to hormone disturbances. Okay, so something to keep in mind as well. Heavy metals, whether it's lead, aluminum, arsenic, mercury, again, we are exposed to these more than we'd like to think. Okay, so for example, aluminum, one of the main culprits of aluminum is deodorants. Okay, so deodorants, you know, have high aluminum load, so switching to more of you know, a natural let's say organic, better option in terms of deodorant, or I have a do-it-yourself recipe that I'll show you at the end. This is definitely something that we want to take into consideration, you know, in terms of aluminum. But we can also find it in drinking water, certain pharmaceuticals, and some symptoms can, you know, joint pain, arthritis, rashes, etc. Arsenic, so rice happens to be very high in arsenic. Whether it's brown rice or white rice, it's actually the same. Basmati rice tends to be better compared to some other types of rice. And then, you know, soaking it the night before, cooking it the same way you would cook pasta. You know, it might be a bit of a challenge, or you can add extra water and then dump a little bit of the extra water and then maybe add cleaner water. This can help get rid of some of the arsenic. Okay, so arsenic, rice is one of the major contributors in our diet. We can also find it in paints, dyes, pharmaceuticals, lead in cosmetics, contaminated drinking water, and then mercury in fish. Okay, so the main contributor, at least in our diets, with respect to mercury, is fish. Usually, the bigger the fish, the larger or the more mercury it's going to accumulate. Okay, so I will definitely talk about healthier options when it comes to choosing fish. So heavy metals, again, we can test for those, and definitely through supporting the liver, through supporting detoxification processes, we can minimize or, you know, reduce mercury or reduce heavy metals in general. Another point when it comes to mercury is dental fillings. Okay, so dental fillings, if you have dental amalgams or mercury, or, you know, these silver fillings, these tend to be high in mercury. Okay, so whether you are struggling with infertility or you are struggling with health conditions, if you have dental fillings, this is something to, you know, take into consideration. And some people choose to remove these. You know, sometimes removing them can make things worse, so it has to be done by somebody who's very specialized. Okay, so how do we reduce the toxins, at least in our food? So first and foremost, you know, minimizing processed foods. Anything that comes in a package is going to have chemicals. So sweets, sugar, you know, foods high in sugar, processed foods, alcohol, those are all considered toxins to the body. Choose lean meats compared to fatty meats. Toxins like to hang out in fat. So even if you are an individual who's trying to lose weight, when you lose weight, when we lose fat mass, more toxins, we have to support basically the liver and all detoxification mechanisms, because when we lose fat, this fat is releasing more toxins into the blood, into the body. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. And we definitely don't want, let's say, a breastfeeding woman to lose significant amounts of weight, because this can cause toxins to be leached out or to come through her breast milk, okay, and into the baby. So going back to fat in meat, so choosing lean meats simply because toxins like to hang out in fat, avoiding fried foods, snack chips that contain acrylamide, avoiding foods with synthetic dyes. So, you know, choosing natural, let's say, dyes like beetroot, carrot, turmeric. Whenever, you know, you buy your fruits and vegetables, let's say your vegetables, if it's a cabbage, peel out or peel off the outer layer, and then wash your. I mean, the best way that, or the way that I use in terms of washing fruits and vegetables, is to you know, soak or rinse them with baking soda. You can use salt as well. Water alone is not going to do the trick. Okay, so even if it's organic, you still want to take into consideration washing it maybe with baking soda or salt. You know, anytime, you know, you can either scrub it or use a brush to scrub any, let's say, dirt that you can see. Washing it, of course, before peeling it, so the contaminants are not transferred onto the knife. And then in terms of cooking, so avoid dry cooking methods. So let's say if you're cooking on an open flame, if you're having barbecue, that can increase the chance of toxins forming. Okay, so things like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So those all form when we, with burnt foods or when we're cooking at high temperatures. Let's say if you're having a barbecue. So having a barbecue, of course, you can still have it. Every now and then, making sure to flip the meat every now and then. And then one thing you can do is to marinate it with an acidic medium, like lemon, for example, that will reduce the toxins that it can form. And then to avoid foods that contain certain preservatives like BHT, BHA, benzoate, sulfites. Sulfites are very common in things like dried fruits, so organic tends to be better. Food colorings and plastic package. Okay, a lot of the times, again, when we go to the market, our fruits and vegetables are wrapped with plastic. As soon as you come back home, just get rid of this plastic. Okay, or try to choose those that are not wrapped with plastic. You can even buy foods, let's say, from bulk bins, so things like legumes, rice, spices, and herbs, in those bins where you just put put the amount that you desire, and they're not pre-wrapped. These are a bunch of food additives to avoid. It's because of time, it might be a bit tricky to go over all of these. But remember, anything that's packaged is more likely to have additives and preservatives. Okay, so things like processed meats, prepackaged bread, soda, of course, candy and sugar and cereal. Okay, so cereal is one of the major sources of glyphosate as well. Okay, so these are a bunch of different food additives that we want to avoid. And then the reason or the justification. Okay, so whether they increase the risk of cancer, affect the hormones, affect the immune system, again, something to take into consideration. The Environmental Working Group, which is a fantastic resource in general with regards to any product, whether it's food, skincare, water filtration systems. It's really a great source. So every year they release the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So what these are is these foods tend to accumulate the most, let's say, pesticides, herbicides, etc. So if you want to choose organic, we might not always have easy access to organic foods, sometimes because of budget reasons. We might want to choose it. I mean, ideally to have organic as much as possible, but if you were to choose between certain foods, then definitely those foods listed under the Dirty Dozen is what you want to go is what you want to have as organic, let's say. So things like strawberry, kale, apples, grapes, pears, tomatoes, those accumulate a high amount of pesticides and herbicides. Okay, so it's best to go for organic in terms of these foods. Anything where basically any fruit or vegetable where you eat the skin, okay, usually I would suggest that you purchase those in the organic form, okay? The clean 15, so for example, avocados, onions, papaya, eggplant, kiwis, broccoli even, those are under the clean 15. Okay, so those, if you had the option between, tomatoes, let's say, and avocados or bananas, possibly, then go for the tomatoes, okay, because they tend to have more of the chemicals. Okay, ideally, we want to have organic of everything. And so the seafood guide, in general, things like salmon, sardines, mussels, those are low mercury. Okay, high mercury, which is what we want to avoid, things like shark, swordfish, tilefish, king mackerel. Okay, so those are very high in mercury, best to avoid these. Tuna, albacore tuna also tends to be high. White tuna tends to be better, but also if you're pregnant, it's best to limit tuna in general. Okay, so I wouldn't suggest having tuna more than maybe once or twice a week if it's canned. Okay, Chilean sea bass tends to also be high in mercury. Okay, so salmon is a good source. Salmon. Then there's that debate between farmed and then wild caught salmon. Definitely wild caught will have not only more nutrition, more omega-3 fatty acids, but also less chemicals, okay? Or I believe it was OCPs, okay? Or certain types of chemicals as opposed to farmed. So something to keep in mind as well. And then shopping smarter. So receipts. Nowadays, we have the option to opt for having the receipts emailed to us. Okay, when we touch the receipts, particularly if we just use antibacterial, which we have been living on, and then touch the receipt, actually, research has shown that we absorb even more of the negative compounds or chemicals in the receipts after just having used antimicrobials or antibacterials. So try and opt for receipts to be emailed or touch them with a glove or a tissue or something. Best to take maybe your own bags when you go to the supermarket. Avoid putting produce in plastic bags. Sometimes in certain supermarkets, I think like Carrefour, for example, they have these material like mesh bags, and then canned food. So try to go for BPA free, BPS free canned foods or anything that's in a glass jar. And then your kitchen. Okay, the kitchen is a place in the house where we can do so much. Get rid of anything that has Teflon. Okay, so your Teflon pans and pots is something we want to throw away, and then make the switch to either glass, Pyrex, cast irons, stainless steel, ceramic. Some brands are great as well, but even ceramic, if it's scratched, so any pot or pan that's scratched, that's also something we want to get rid of. Okay. Please also make the step to move from storing food in plastic containers and then moving to glass containers. A lot of the glass containers have plastic lids. If that's not touching the food, then it's okay. Okay. This is, the next best step. So if that's the only option available, glass with a plastic lid, that's okay. Avoid having the food in direct contact with that plastic lid. Aluminum foil, particularly if you're heating food with aluminum foil, if you're placing it on hot food, if it's in direct contact with food, then it's going to release chemicals into the food. So use parchment paper that has been unbleached. And then avoid wrapping food in cling film. You can put them in glass containers as well. Plastic chopping boards, switch to bamboo or wood chopping boards. Plastic straws, we can switch to stainless steel straws. And these are actually a lot of these things you can find, whether it's on Amazon um, or, even things like IKEA. I think a lot of them we can find online. Okay. Plastic water bottles, switching to glass. Water bottles are stainless steel. Even our kids, when they go to school, stainless steel bottle is a good idea. And then rather than cooking with plastic utensils, wood or stainless steel utensils when it comes to whether it's cooking or serving food. How can we reduce toxins in the house? We want to clean our air. Okay, so through air purifiers, air doctor is fantastic. Blue air is a good option as well. Particularly if someone is smoking in the house, please avoid smoking in the house. If you have pets, an air purifier can be great. Essential oil diffuser. So rather than having fragrances or candles, or air fresheners, please switch to having a diffuser, an essential oil diffuser, using, let's say, organic essential oils. Young Living, doTERRA are fantastic brands. There's Neil's Yard as well. Air purifying plants, some of my favorites are spider plant, snake plant, areca palm, Boston fern, peace lily. So those are really good in terms of absorbing toxic compounds in the air, sometimes radiation. It's really good, to have them everywhere, even in your bedroom. And then water filtration system. This can depend from country to country, city to city, depending on the quality of the water. Sorry. And then reducing toxins in the house. Please keep in mind that, a lot of the terms that we see on products that we buy, things like natural, biodegradable, green, are not necessarily regulated, or doesn't mean that it's not toxic. Okay, so something to keep in mind. So please choose fragrance-free, unscented products. I'll talk about fragrance as well. When you see the word fragrance, it might be something you want to let go of. Okay, so anything that has fragrance can have sometimes hundreds of chemicals. Okay, so, and these again can negatively impact our health. If you purchase new furniture, a new car, a new mattress, if it's a new car, leaving the windows open for a couple of days to let that smell come out. Any mattress or furniture, maybe leaving it outside again, as your home permits, or as maybe if you have a balcony or a back, garden, at least for them to off gas, okay, because they do release some toxic chemicals. For clothing, go for more natural material, cotton, linen, wool, silk. Always take shoes off outside the house because we bring back toxins through our shoes as well. As I mentioned, avoid smoking in the house. Mold. Okay, so please check for mold. The number of people that we've seen, I think Amal can agree as well. People, doing all the right things and then they are still struggling. And then they find out that they have mold, whether it's in the ACs, whether it's, in the kitchen, in the bathroom. So please, if you have mold, it has to be addressed in the proper way. Okay, so there are specialized companies that come and check for your AC. Sometimes it's for free. They just come and do an inspection and then they will tell you if there's mold and then they can give you a quotation how much it's going to cost in order for them to address it. And, I think there's healthy homes in the UAE. It has to be, it's best for it to be addressed in a natural way. Okay, so sometimes they use things like tea tree oil. Uh, Please, sometimes maintenance companies will just paint over it. That's just wrong. And then reducing exposure to EMFs. We can have a whole discussion on EMFs. So just, avoid putting your phone in your pocket. Even in a lot, your laptop has to be quite a bit of a distance away. Switch your Wi-Fi off when you're sleeping, airplane mode, because again, those can negatively impact our health. Some brands to consider, as I mentioned, I'm not affiliated with any. I've tried a few. You might have, other preferences, but seventh generation. So these were rated by the environmental working group as, with high scores. So Attitude, Dr. Bronner's, seventh generation, and then there's Thieves as well by Young Living. Alternatively, just to clean your home, you can use water and vinegar and maybe some essential oils for a nice smell. Okay, so reducing skin toxins, these are just some of the things you want to avoid. Okay, so whether it's triclosan, retinol, palmitate that can, affect the skin, especially in kids. Even things like fluoride in toothpaste. Okay, so remember, hair dyes, even pads, nail polish, again, all something to take into consideration. And it's always best to look for third-party organizations that have independently reviewed the products. Okay, so for example, fair trade certifications, the fact that it hasn't been tested in animals, organic certifications, etc. And then these are some compounds that are also found in skincare products that can increase the risk of allergies or skin irritations. So as you can see, anything that has fragrance or perfume or parfum can include all these chemicals and even more. Okay, so many manufacturers may use fragrance-free, hypoallergenic just for marketing purposes. For kids, watch out for parabens, fragrance, talc, formaldehyde. Okay, so even for lotion, I use on my baby just regular coconut oil. Okay, please avoid baby powder. Go for, in terms of diaper rash creams, avoid something that has boric acid. Okay, so again, just small things to take into consideration. As Amal mentioned, so we can really be controlling how many toxins we are exposed to, but at the same time, we need to support our detoxification. So infrared saunas is a fantastic way to sweat. Exercise is a fantastic way to sweat, release toxins, release heavy metals, ensure we have regular bowel movements. You are pooping at least once a day, once or twice a day, drinking water, maintaining hydration, and things like green tea, turmeric, milk thistle, herbal teas like dandelion, licorice, NAC, glutathione, chlorella, as well as fantastic in terms of binding to heavy metals and other toxins. Other foods, cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower, cabbage, kale, broccoli, chlorophyll-rich vegetables like dark green leafy vegetables, wheatgrass, sulfur-containing foods like garlic and onion, citrus peels like lemon, lime, orange that are very rich in D-limonene, and then polyphenol-rich foods like berries, rosemary, turmeric, those all for detoxification. They can improve gut health as well, ensuring you're taking in 30 to 35 grams of fiber a day in order to get things moving out of the body. We need to poop on a regular basis. And then those can help bind heavy metals. Okay, again, chlorella. Coriander is fantastic. Modified citrus pectin, quercetin, curcumin, green leafy vegetables. So I know this seems a bit overwhelming, but remember, just small changes make huge differences. Think of everything, think of what you are exposed to the most. Okay, it may be, plastics, let's say. Think of small changes that you want to make. Okay, it could be one change a month or two changes a month. Okay, if you use a lot, let's say if you're constantly using nail polish, if you have plastic, plastic toys, so think of what you can do that's easiest for you in terms of time, in terms of budget. Okay, and create sort of like a spreadsheet for yourself or a checklist of what you think you can target on maybe a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Okay, and just make a small change, as long as it's a change that can be a long-term change or something you can do on a basically, on a consistent basis, then that really will make all the difference. So here are some resources: the Environmental Working Group, Ethical Consumer, and then there's Marissa Snyder has some great recipes as well on how to incorporate essential oils in whether it's beauty care products or cleaning detergents. So this chart over here, or the figure, is Environmental Working Group. They have so many home guides. So whether you're trying to choose the best home filter, or you just want information regarding any of these, they have some fantastic resources. And then there are some apps. So the Environmental Working Group also has the Healthy Living app, the Skin Deep database, such a large database rating all sorts of different beauty care products. There's the Think Dirty app, Detoxify Me, Good Guide. A lot of those is sometimes you can scan the product and then it can give you some information, or you can just enter the product and then it gives either a rating or just more information to help guide you. And finally, this is the deodorant recipe that I mentioned. Something, again, that can easily be made at home with coconut oil, baking soda, arrowroot powder, etc., as opposed to the aluminum-rich deodorants that you could be using on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that was informative.